it's time for the real showstopper, a fondant-covered heart cake. Now this is taking pound cake to the next level. I've taken that same lemon pound cake that I first made in the loaf pan, except baked one recipe in a square pan, this is an 8-inch square, and one recipe in an 8-inch round. So this is ready to be iced and assembled. Now before I get to rolling out the fondant, you have to cover the cake with a frosting. I start with 3/4 of a cup of unsalted butter, and I've got a total of 6 cups of icing sugar sifted here. But I'm first going to add just 2 cups and beat that with the butter. I can add to that 6 tablespoons of milk, along with a 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla. This, of course, softens the frosting, but once I add more icing sugar, also helps to make it fluffy. There we go. Now that the butter's worked in, I'll add an additional 2 cups of icing sugar, and I may need to add more. Depending on how soft your butter is to start with, you may have to add more or less of that icing sugar. If you find the frosting at the end is not fluffy but seems too firm, just a few more drops of milk will fix it. And you can see, as I added more icing sugar, how light and pale the frosting got. But now, because we're doing a pink-colored cake, let's tint the buttercream frosting that's to go underneath it. Just add a touch using a toothpick. Just touch it onto the frosting. Start with a little, you can always add more, but it's hard to take the pink color away once you've added it. It's a nice, subtle pink color. Just give it a good stir, just to make sure it's all the same color all the way through. When I frost a cake, I do like to use a cake wheel. It's a good investment if you find you're decorating cakes for a lot of special occasions. And I'll first put each of the cakes on a cake board. That way it's easy to move around without damaging the cake. I'll start with the round one. Peel off the parchment, put the board over. You want to cut it in half and fill it with a bit of that frosting. Set this aside. And just a thin layer of the pink frosting in the middle of the cake. There we go. Then invert the top layer. That way you get a nice level top to the cake. But now I'm going to set this aside for the moment and do the same for the square. And with a frosting like this, doesn't need refrigeration, so you can make it and assemble it well ahead of time. I'll flip the top of the square upside down. So now, to create the heart shape. This time, I'm going to use a 14-inch square cake board. I'll place the square cake towards the bottom of the cake board. I'll bring in the round, and I cut this in half, just like you're cutting a sandwich in half. Now, with a little frosting glue, there we go. I take one half and paste it on, and then the other half. And there it is, a beautiful heart shape. Now I cover the top and the sides of the cake with the buttercream. That way every slice has a bit of that pink buttercream, but it also evens it out, so you have a nice flat top to the cake. A nice even coating of the frosting. And before I put on the fondant layer, you want to chill the buttercream down. That way it sets in place, so when you put this icing on, it stays in place and you can retain that beautiful heart shape. And I have one that's already been chilled, so it's ready for the fondant coating. When rolling out the fondant, just use a dusting of icing sugar to keep it from sticking. Now, instead of adding coloring to the whole batch of white fondant, I'm going to take a smaller piece and make that my base. And just like the frosting, a little goes a long way. So as you're kneading it, you can see the color develop. There we go. Now I take the small piece. I'll knead the small piece into the big one until it's an even pink color. You can use a wooden rolling pin, or there's even plastic rolling pins that are designed for fondant. If in rolling you ever see a little air pocket like this, all you have to do is take a little toothpick, pierce it, rub out the air, and then keep rolling again. And then use the rolling pin to roll up the fondant and carry it over to the cake. Unroll it right on. You want to start at the middle and work towards the ends and massage out any air pockets. So you can really see why a pound cake, because it stays in place, is good for a style like this. Then, once you've got the top done, gently start pressing into the sides. So now the fondant clings onto the buttercream frosting. Use a paring knife to trim the fondant around the bottom of the cake. Just brush off any excess icing sugar. This is truly a stunning and professional application of a lemon pound cake recipe.